Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Part 2. The thief, before he pulled off the band, marked the door with a piece of chalk, which he had ready in his hand, and then asked him if he knew whose house that was, to which Baba Mustafa replied that he did not live in that neighborhood, he could not tell. The robber, finding he could discover no more from Baba Mustafa, thanked him for the trouble he had taken and left him to go back to his stall, while he returned to the forest, persuaded that he shall be very well received. A little after the robber and Baba Mustafa had parted, Morgiana went out of Ali Baba's house upon some errand, and upon her return, seeing the mark the robber had made, stopped to observe it. "What can be the meaning of this mark?" she said to herself. "Somebody intends my master no good. However, with whatever intention it was done, it is advisable to guard against the worst." Accordingly, she fetched a piece of chalk and marked 2 or 3 doors on each side in the same manner, without saying a word to her master or mistress. In the meantime, the thief rejoined his troop in the forest and recounted to them his success. All the robbers listened to him with utmost satisfaction, when the captain, after commending his diligence, addressing himself to them all, said, "Comrades, we have no time to lose. Let us set off well armed, but that we may not excite suspicion, let only 1 or 2 go into the town together and join at our rendezvous, which shall be the great square. In the meantime, our comrade who brought us the good news and I will go and find out the house, that we may consult what had best be done." This plan was approved of by all, and they were soon ready. They filed off in parties of 2 each, and got into the town without being in the least suspected. The captain, and he who had visited the town in the morning as a spy, came in the last. He led the captain into the street where he had marked Ali Baba's residence, and when they came to the first of the houses which Morgiana had marked, he pointed it out. But the captain observed that the next house was chalked in the same manner, and showing it to his guide, asked him which house it was, that or the first. The guide was so confounded that he knew not what answer to make, but still more puzzled when he saw 5 or 6 houses similarly marked. He assured the captain with an oath that he had marked but one, and could not tell who had chalked the rest, so that he could not distinguish the house which the cobbler had stopped at. The captain, finding that their design had proved abortive, went directly to the place of the rendezvous, and told the first of his troop whom he met that they had lost their labor and must return to their cave. When the troop was all got together, the captain told them the reason of their returning, and presently the conductor was declared by all worthy of death. He condemned himself, acknowledging that he ought to have taken better precaution, and prepared to receive the stroke from him who was appointed to cut off his head. Another of the gang, who promised himself that he should succeed better, immediately presented himself, and his offer being accepted, he went and corrupted Baba Mustafa, as the other had done, and being shown to the house, marked it in a place more remote from sight, with red chalk. Not long after, Morgiana, whose eyes nothing could escape, went out, and seeing the red chalk, and arguing with herself as she had done before, marked the other neighbors' houses in the same place and manner. The robber, at his return to his company, valued himself much on the precaution he had taken, which he looked upon as an infallible way of distinguishing Ali Baba's house from the others, and the captain and all of them thought it must succeed. They conveyed themselves into the town with the same precaution as before, but when the robber and his captain came to the street, they found the same difficulty, at which the captain was enraged, and the robber in as great confusion as his predecessor. Thus the captain and his troop were forced to retire a second time, and much more dissatisfied, while the unfortunate robber, who had been the author of the mistake, underwent the same punishment, which he willingly submitted to. The captain, having lost 2 brave fellows of his troop, was afraid of diminishing it too much by pursuing this plan to get information of the residence of their plunderer. He found by their example that their heads were not so good as their hands on such occasions, and therefore resolved to take upon himself the important commission. Accordingly, he went and addressed himself to Baba Mustafa, who did him the same service he had done to the other robbers. He did not set any particular mark on the house, but examined and observed it so carefully, by passing often by it, that it was impossible for him to mistake it. The captain, well satisfied with his attempt, and informed of what he wanted to know, returned to the forest, and when he came into the cave, where the troop waited for him, said, "Now, comrades, nothing can prevent our full revenge, as I am certain of the house, and in my way hither I have thought how to put it into execution, but if anyone can form a better expedient, let him communicate it." He then told them his contrivance, and as they approved of it, ordered them to go into the villages about, and buy 19 mules with 38 large leather jars, one full of oil, and the others empty. In 2 or 3 days' time the robbers had purchased the mules and jars, and as the mouths of the jars were rather too narrow for his purpose, the captain caused them to be widened. And after having put one of his men into each, with the weapons which he thought fit, leaving open the seam which had been undone to leave them room to breathe, he rubbed the jars on the outside with oil from the full vessel. Things being thus prepared, when the 19 mules were loaded with 37 robbers and jars, and the jar of oil, the captain, as their driver, set out with them, and reached the town by the dusk of the evening, as he had intended. He led them through the streets till he came to Ali Baba's, at whose house he designed to have knocked, but was prevented by his sitting there after supper to take a little fresh air. He stopped his mules, addressing himself to him, and said, "I have brought some oil a great way, to sell at tomorrow's market, and it is now so late that I do not know where to lodge. If I should not be troublesome to you, do me the favor to let me pass the night with you, and I shall be very much obliged by your hospitality." Though Ali Baba had seen the captain of the robbers in the forest, and had heard him speak, it was hardly possible to know him in the disguise of an oil merchant. He told him he should be welcome, and immediately opened his gates for the mules to go into the yard. At the same time he called to a slave and ordered him, when the mules were unloaded, to put them into the stable and give them fodder, and then went to Morgiana to bid her get a good supper. He did more. When he saw the captain had unloaded his mules, and that they were put into the stables as he had ordered, and he was looking for a place to pass the night in the air, he brought them into the hall where he received his company, telling him he would not suffer him to be in the court. The captain excused himself on pretense of not being troublesome, but really to have room to execute his design, and it was not till after the most pressing importunity that he yielded. Ali Baba, not content to keep company till supper was ready, with a man who had a design on his life, continued talking with him till it was ended, and repeating his offer of service. The captain rose up at the same time with his host, and while Ali Baba went to speak with Morgiana, he withdrew into the yard, under pretense of looking at his mules. Ali Baba, after charging Morgiana afresh to take care of his guest, said to her, "Tomorrow morning I design to go to the bath before day. Take care my bathing linens be ready, give them to Abdullah, which was the slave's name, and make me some good broth against I return." After this, he went to bed. In the meantime, the captain went from the stable to give his people orders what to do, and beginning at the first jar, and so on to the last, said to each man, "As soon as I throw some stones out of the chamber window where I lie, do not fail to cut the jar open with the knife you have about you for the purpose, and come out, and I will immediately join you." After this, he returned into the house, when Morgiana, taking up a light, conducted him to his chamber, where she left him, and he, to avoid any suspicion, put the light out soon after, and laid himself down in his clothes, that he might be the more ready to rise. Morgiana, remembering Ali Baba's orders, got his bathing linens ready, and ordered Abdullah to set on the pot for the broth. But while she was preparing it, the lamp went out, and there was no more oil in the house, nor any candles. What to do she did not know, for the broth must be made. Abdullah, seeing her very uneasy, said, "Do not fret and tease yourself, but go into the yard and take some oil out of one of the jars." Morgiana thanked Abdullah for his advice, took the oil pot, and went into the yard. When as she came nigh the first jar, the robber within said softly, "Is it time?" Though the robber spoke low, Morgiana was struck with the voice the more, because the captain, when he unloaded the mules, had taken the lids off this and all the other jars to give air to his men, who were ill enough at their ease, almost wanting room to breathe. As much surprised as Morgiana naturally was at finding a man in a jar, instead of the oil she wanted, many would have made such an outcry as to have given an alarm, whereas Morgiana, comprehending immediately the importance of keeping silence, and the necessity of applying a speedy remedy without noise, conceived at once the means, and collecting herself without showing the least emotion, answered, "Not yet, but presently." She went in this manner to all the jars, giving the same answer, till she came to the jar of oil. By this means Morgiana found that her master Ali Baba, who thought that he had entertained an oil merchant, had admitted 38 robbers into his house, regarding this pretended merchant as their captain. She made what haste she could to fill her oil pot, and returned into her kitchen, where, as soon as she had lighted her lamp, she took a great kettle, went again to the oil jar, filled the kettle, and set it on a large wood fire, and as soon as it boiled, went and poured enough into every jar to stifle and destroy the robber within. When this action, worthy of the courage of Morgiana, was executed without any noise, she returned into the kitchen with the empty kettle, and having put out the great fire she had made to boil the oil, and leaving just enough to make the broth, put out the lamp also, and remained silent, resolving not to go to rest till she had observed what might follow through a window of the kitchen, which opened into the yard. She had not waited long before the captain of the robbers got up, opened the window, and finding no light and hearing no noise, or anyone stirring in the house, gave the appointed signal by throwing little stones, several of which hit the jars, as he doubted not by the sound they gave. He then listened, but not hearing or perceiving anything whereby he could judge that his companion stirred, he began to grow very uneasy, threw stones again a second and also a third time, and could not comprehend the reason that none of them should answer his signal. Much alarmed, he went softly down into the yard, and going to the first jar, while asking the robber, whom he thought alive, if he was in readiness, smelt the hot boiled oil, which sent forth a steam out of the jar. Hence he suspected that his plot to murder Ali Baba and plunder his house was discovered. Examining all the jars one after another, he found that all the members of his gang were dead, and by the oil he missed out of the last jar, guessed the means and manner of their death. Enraged to despair at having failed in his design, he forced the lock of a door that led from the yard to the garden, and climbing over the walls, made his escape. When Morgiana heard no noise, and found, after waiting some time, that the captain did not return, she concluded that he had chosen rather to make his escape by the garden than the street door, which was double locked. Satisfied and pleased to have succeeded so well in saving her master and family, she went to bed. Ali Baba rose before day, and followed by his slave, went to the baths, entirely ignorant of the important event that had happened at home, for Morgiana had not thought it safe to wake him before, for fear of losing her opportunity, and after her successful exploit she thought it needless to disturb him. When he returned from the baths, the sun was risen. He was very much surprised to see the oil jars, and that the merchant was not gone with the mules. He asked Morgiana, who opened the door, and had let all things stand as they were, that he might see them, the reason of it. "My good master," answered she, "God preserve you and all your family. You will be better informed of what you wish to know when you have seen what I have to show you, if you will but give yourself the trouble to follow me." As soon as Morgiana had shut the door, Ali Baba followed her, when she requested him to look into the first jar and see if there was any oil. Ali Baba did so, and seeing a man, started back in alarm and cried out. "Do not be afraid," said Morgiana. "The man you see there can neither do you nor anybody else any harm. He is dead." "Ah, Morgiana," said Ali Baba, "what is it you show me? Explain yourself." "I will," replied Morgiana. "Moderate your astonishment and do not excite the curiosity of your neighbors. Look into all the other jars." Ali Baba examined all the other jars, and when he came to that which had the oil in, found it prodigiously sunk, and stood for some time motionless, sometimes looking at the jars, and sometimes at Morgiana, without saying a word, so great was his surprise. At last, when he had recovered himself, he said, "And what has become of the merchant?" "Merchant?" answered she. "He is as much one as I am. I will tell you who he is, and what has become of him. But you had better hear the story in your own chamber, for it is time for your health that you had your broth after your bathing." While Ali Baba retired to his chamber, Morgiana went into the kitchen to fetch the broth, but before he could drink it, he first entreated her to satisfy his impatience and tell him what had happened, with all the circumstances, and she obeyed him. "This," she said, when she had completed her story, "is the account you asked of me, and I am convinced it is the consequence of what I observed some days ago, but did not think fit to acquaint you with. For when I came in one morning early, I found our street door marked with white chalk, and the next morning with red, upon which, both times without knowing what was the intention of those chalks, I marked 2 or 3 neighbors' doors on each side in the same manner. If you reflect on this, and what has since happened, you will find it to be a plot of the robbers of the forest, of whose gang there are 2 wanting, and now they are reduced to 3. All this shows that they had sworn your destruction, and it is proper you should be upon your guard while there is one of them alive. For my part, I shall neglect nothing necessary to your preservation, as I am in duty bound." When Morgiana had left off speaking, Ali Baba was so sensible of the great service she had done him that he said to her, "I will not die without rewarding you as you deserve. I owe my life to you, and for the first token of my acknowledgement, give you your liberty from this moment, till I can complete your recompense as I intend. I am persuaded with you that the 40 robbers have laid snares for my destruction. God, by your means, has delivered me from them as yet, and I hope will continue to preserve me from their wicked designs, and deliver the world from their persecution. All that we have to do is bury the bodies of these pests of mankind immediately, and with all the secrecy imaginable, that nobody may suspect what has become of them. but that labor Abdullah and I will undertake." Ali Baba's garden was very long, and shaded at the farther end by a great number of large trees. Under these, he and the slave dug a trench, long and wide enough to hold all the robbers. Afterward, they lifted the bodies out of the jars, took away their weapons, carried them to the end of the garden, laid them in the trench, and leveled the ground again. When this was done, Ali Baba hid the jars and weapons, and as he had no occasion for the mules, he sent them at different times to be sold in the market by his slave. While Ali Baba took these measures to prevent the public from knowing how he came by his riches in so short a time, the captain of the 40 robbers returned to the forest with inconceivable mortification, and in his confusion at his ill success, so contrary to what he had promised himself, entered the cave, not being able, all the way from the town, to come to any resolution how to revenge himself of Ali Baba. The loneliness of the gloomy cavern became frightful to him. "Where are you, my brave lads?" cried he, "old companions of my watchings, inroads, and labor. What can I do without you? Did I collect you only to lose you by so base a fate, and so unworthy of your courage? Had you died with your sabres in your hands like brave men, my regret had been less. When shall I enlist so gallant a troop again? And if I could, can I undertake it without exposing so much gold and treasure to him who hath already enriched himself out of it? I cannot. I ought not think of it before I have taken away his life. I will undertake that alone which I could not accomplish with your powerful assistance. And when I have taken measures to secure this treasure from being pillaged, I will provide for it new masters and successors after me, who shall preserve and augment it to all posterity." This resolution being taken, he was not at a loss how to execute his purpose, but full of hopes, slept all that night very quietly. When he awoke early next morning, he dressed himself agreeably to the project he had formed, went to the town, and took a lodging in a khan. As he expected what had happened at Ali Baba's might make a great noise, he asked his host what news there was in the city, upon which the innkeeper told him a great many circumstances, which did not concern him in the least. He judged by this that the reason why Ali Baba kept his affairs so secret was for fear people should know where the treasure lay, and because he knew his life would be sought on account of it. This urged him the more to neglect nothing to rid himself of so cautious an enemy. The captain now assumed the character of a merchant, and conveyed gradually a great many sorts of rich stuffs and fine linen to his lodging from the cavern, but with all the necessary precautions imaginable to conceal the place whence he brought them. In order to dispose of the merchandise when he had amassed them together, he took a warehouse, which happened to be opposite to Kasim's, which Ali Baba's son had occupied since the death of his uncle. He took the name of Khoja Hussein, and as a newcomer, was, according to custom, extremely civil and complacent to all the merchants his neighbors. Ali Baba's son was from his vicinity one of the first to converse with Khoja Hussein, who strove to cultivate his friendship more particularly when, 2 or 3 days after he was settled, he recognized Ali Baba, who came to see his son, and stopped to talk with him as he was accustomed to do. When he was gone, the impostor learned from his son who he was. He increased his assiduities, kissed him in the most engaging manner, made him some small presents, and often asked him to dine and sup with him. Ali Baba's son did not choose to lie under such obligation to Khoja Hussein, without making the like return, but was so much straitened for want of room in his house that he could not entertain him so well as he wished. He therefore acquainted his father Ali Baba with his intention, and told him that it did not look well for him to receive such favors from Khoja Hussein without inviting him in return. Ali Baba, with great pleasure, took the treat upon himself. "Son," said he, "tomorrow being Friday, which is a day that the shops of such great merchants as Khoja Hussein and yourself are shut, get him to come take a walk with you, and as you come back, pass by my door and call in. It will look better to have it happen accidentally than if you gave him a formal invitation. I will go and order Morgiana to provide a supper." The next day, Ali Baba's son and Khoja Hussein met by appointment, took their walk, and as they returned, Ali Baba's son led Khoja Hussein through the street where his father lived, and when they came to the house, stopped and knocked at the door. "This, sir," said he, "is my father's house, who, from the account I have given him of your friendship, charged me to procure him the honor of your acquaintance." Though it was the sole aim of Khoja Hussein to introduce himself into Ali Baba's house, that he might kill him without hazarding his own life or making any noise, yet he excused himself and offered to take his leave. But a slave having opened the door, Ali Baba's son took him obligingly by the hand and in a manner forced him in. Ali Baba received Khoja Hussein with a smiling countenance, and in the most obliging manner. He thanked him for all the favors he had done his son, adding withal, the obligation was the greater, as he was a young man not much acquainted with the world. Khuja Hussain returned the compliment by assuring Ali Baba that though his son might not have acquired the experience of older men, he had good sense equal to the knowledge of many others. After a little more conversation on different subjects, he offered again to take his leave, when Ali Baba, stopping him, said, "Where are you going, sir, in so much haste? I beg you would do me the honor to sup with me, though what I have to give you is not worth your acceptance. But such as it is, I hope you will accept it as heartily as I give it." "Sir," replied Khuja Hussain, "I am thoroughly persuaded of your goodwill, and if I ask the favor of you not to take it ill, that I do not accept your obliging invitation, I beg of you to believe that it does not proceed from any slight or intention to affront, but from a reason which you would approve if you knew it." "And what may that reason be, sir?" replied Ali Baba, "if I may be so bold as to ask you?" "It is," answered Khuja Hussain, "that I can eat no victuals that have any salt in them. Therefore judge how I should feel at your table." "If that is the only reason," said Ali Baba, "it ought not to deprive me of the honor of your company at supper, for, in the first place, there is no salt ever put into my bread, and as to the meat we shall have tonight, I promise you there shall be none in that. Therefore you must do me the favor to stay. I will return immediately." Ali Baba went into the kitchen and ordered Morgiana to put no salt to the meat that was to be dressed that night, and to make quickly 2 or 3 ragouts besides what he had ordered, but be sure to put no salt in them. Morgiana, who was always ready to obey her master, could not help seeming somewhat dissatisfied at this strange order. "Who is this difficult man," said she, "who eats no salt with his meat? Your supper will be spoiled if I keep it back so long." "Do not be angry, Morgiana," replied Ali Baba. "He is an honest man, therefore do as I bid you." Morgiana obeyed, though with no little reluctance, and had a curiosity to see this man who ate no salt. To this end, when she had finished what she had to do in the kitchen, she helped Abdullah to carry up the dishes, and looking at Khuja Hussain, knew him at first sight, notwithstanding his disguise, to be the captain of the robbers, and examining him very carefully, perceived that he had a dagger under his garment. "I am not in the least amazed," said she to herself, "that this wicked wretch, who is my master's greatest enemy, would eat no salt with him, since he intends to assassinate him, but I will prevent him." Morgiana, while they were eating, made the necessary preparations for executing one of the boldest acts ever meditated, and had just determined when Abdullah came for the dessert of fruit, which she had carried up, and as soon as he had taken the meat away, set upon the table. After that, she placed 3 glasses by Ali Baba, and going out, took Abdullah with her to sup, and to give Ali Baba the more liberty of conversation with his guest. Khuja Hussain, or rather the captain of the robbers, thought he had now a favorable opportunity of being revenged on Ali Baba. "I will," said he to himself, "make the father and son both drunk. The son, whose life I intend to spare, will not be able to prevent my stabbing his father to the heart, and while the slaves are at supper, or asleep in the kitchen, I can make my escape over the gardens as before." Instead of going to supper, Morgiana, who had penetrated the intentions of the counterfeit Khuja Hussain, would not give him time to put his villainous design into execution, but dressed herself neatly with a suitable headdress like a dancer, girded her waist with a silver gilt girdle, to which there hung a poniard with a hilt and guard of the same metal, and put a handsome mask on her face. When she had thus disguised herself, she said to Abdullah, "Take your tabor, and let us go and divert our master and his son's guest, as we do sometimes when he is alone." Abdullah took his tabor and played all the way into the hall before Morgiana, who when she came to the door made a low obeisance, with a deliberate air, in order to draw attention, and by way of asking leave to exhibit her skill. Abdullah, seeing that his master had a mind to say something, left off playing. "Come in, Morgiana," said Ali Baba, "and let Khuja Hussain see what you can do, that he may tell us what he thinks of you." "But sir," said he, turning towards his guest, "do not think that I put myself to any expense to give you this diversion, since these are my slave, and my cook and housekeeper, and I hope you will not find the entertainment they give us disagreeable." Khuja Hussain, who did not expect this diversion after supper, began to fear he should not be able to improve the opportunity he thought he had found, but hoped, if he now missed his aim, to secure it another time, by keeping up a friendly correspondence with the father and son. Therefore, though he could have wished Ali Baba would have declined the dance, he had the complacence to express his satisfaction at what he saw pleased his host. As soon as Abdullah saw that Ali Baba and Khuja Hussain had done talking, he began to play on with a tabor, and accompanied it with an air, to which Morgiana, who was an excellent performer, danced in such a manner as would have created admiration in any other company besides that before which she was now exhibited, among whom, perhaps, none but the false Khuja Hussein was in the least attentive to her, the rest having seen her so frequently. After she had danced several dances with equal propriety and grace, she drew the poniard, and holding it out in her hand, began to dance, in which she outdid herself by the many different figures, light movements, and the surprising leaps and wonderful exertions with which she accompanied it. Sometimes she presented the poniard to one person's breast, sometimes to another's, and oftentimes seemed to strike her own. At last, as if she was out of breath, she snatched the tabor from Abdullah with her left hand, and holding the dagger in her right, presented the other side of the tabor, after the manner of those who get a livelihood by dancing, and solicit the liberality of the spectators. Ali Baba put a piece of gold into the tabor, as did his son, and Khuja Hussein, seeing that she was coming to him, had pulled his purse out of his bosom to make her a present. But while he was putting his hand into it, Morgiana, with a courage and resolution worthy of herself, plunged the poniard into his heart. Ali Baba and his son, shocked at this action, cried out aloud. "Unhappy wretch!" exclaimed Ali Baba. "What have you done to ruin me and my family?" "It was to preserve, not to ruin you," answered Morgiana. "For see here," continued she, opening the pretended Khuja Hussein's garment and showing the dagger, "what an enemy you had entertained. Look well at him, and you will find him to be both the fictitious oil merchant and the captain of the gang of 40 robbers. Remember, too, that he would eat no salt with you, and what would you have more to persuade you of his wicked design? Before I saw him, I suspected him as soon as you told me you had such a guest. I knew him, and you now find that my suspicion was not groundless." Ali Baba, who immediately felt the new obligation he had to Morgiana for saving his life a second time, embraced her. "Morgiana," said he, "I gave you your liberty, and then promised you that my gratitude should not stop there, but that I would soon give you higher proofs of its sincerity, which I now do by making you my daughter-in-law." Then addressing himself to his son, he said, "I believe you, son, to be so dutiful a child that you will not refuse Morgiana for your wife. You see that Khuja Hussein sought your friendship with a treacherous design to take away my life, and, if he had succeeded, there is no doubt that he would have sacrificed you also to his revenge. Consider that by marrying Morgiana, you marry the preserver of my family and your own." The son, far from showing any dislike, readily consented to the marriage, not only because he would not disobey his father, but also because it was agreeable to his inclination. After this, they thought of burying the captain of the robbers with his comrades, and did it so privately that nobody discovered their bones till many years after, when no one had any concern in the publication of this remarkable history. A few days afterward, Ali Baba celebrated the nuptials of his son and Morgiana with great solemnity, a sumptuous feast, and the usual dancing and spectacles, and had the satisfaction to see that his friends and neighbors, whom he invited, had no knowledge of the true motives of the marriage, but that those who were not unacquainted with Morgiana's good qualities commended his generosity and goodness of heart. Ali Baba forbore, after this marriage, from going again to the robber's cave, as he had done, for fear of being surprised, from the time he had brought away his brother Kasim's mangled remains. He had kept away after the death of the 37 robbers and their captain, supposing the other 2, whom he could get no account of, might be alive. At the year's end, when he found that they had not made any attempt to disturb him, he had the curiosity to make another journey, taking the necessary precautions for his safety. He mounted his horse, and when he came to the cave, and saw no footsteps of men or beasts, looked upon it as a good sign. He alighted, tied his horse to a tree, then approaching the entrance and pronouncing the words, "Open, Sesame," the door opened. He entered the cavern, and by the condition he found things in, judged that nobody had been there since the false Khuja Hussein, when he had fetched the goods for his shop, that the gang of 40 robbers was completely destroyed, and no longer doubted that he was the only person in the world who had the secret of opening the cave, so that all the treasure was at his sole disposal. Having brought with him a wallet, he put into it as much gold as his horse would carry and returned to town. Afterward, Ali Baba carried his son to the cave and taught him the secret, which they handed down to their posterity, who, using their good fortune with moderation, lived in great honor and splendor. End of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Thanks for listening. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment with any thoughts you had on the story. Jigabiddy out.